The Daley Grind with Joey Daley.
Ooh, I was thinking in the car on the way here, emotional abandonment is a thing. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do. Whatever's going to make me cry. On the show again today is Dr. Kristen.
Not doctor.
Not doctor.
Nope.
Why not? It sounds so much better.
I know it does, but...
We can't say that?
No.
Even if I buy you a fake degree?
Sure. I know my wall.
We got to come up with some catchy name because a lot of people loved the last podcast and all the short clips of all the things that you had to offer. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, you said you'd like to focus on abandonment.
Okay, let's do abandonment issues because I did some Google trends and looked up some things, and there's a lot of talk about abandonment issues. So,
Can I reframe that actually before we even start?
yes.
So I think a better term for it is abandonment wounds. And the reason I like the metaphor of a wound is that it's both not necessarily the person's fault, but also their responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, usually a wound that deep is not self-inflicted, but it is their responsibility to take care of it. Just like if you were to be hurt and you had a wound, if you don't take care of it, it doesn't heal right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if you say abandonment issues, that's suggesting that the person is the problem, right? And if you say something like abandonment trauma, that's implying that the person is a victim, which, a lot of times when people are struggling, they don't want to be considered a victim. It feels very weak and they feel powerless. And but if you say wounds, then it's both. You know, that it's something that happened to them, but from there on, it's their responsibility to heal it.
Yeah. So let's just get right into it and give some examples. Let's say you have a father in and out of your life ever since you're a young kid. What can that do to you as an adult when you don't realize those issues when you're young, but start to have issues as an adult?
Well, a lot of times the patterns kind of repeat. Either you become the person who does the abandoning, or you're attracted to people who may abandon you eventually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's kind of a pattern that repeats. They say that you marry one of your parents, not necessarily the one of the opposite gender or the same gender if you're, if you're attracted to the same sex. So it's kind of just whichever parent you have maybe more needs to, like more healing to do in that relationship. You may end up finding that in a partner. So
interesting. So let's say I had abandonment wounds. So I might seek that out in my next
maybe, but it's
girlfriend,
unconscious.
marriage.
Yeah, you don't do these things on purpose. A lot of times these things are not chosen consciously. You kind of find yourself in that situation because what we do when we have those wounds is we'll unconsciously create. Unconsciously is important here because you're not doing this on purpose. Create situations where you might have the opportunity to heal that wound. But what often happens is the pattern just continues, creating deeper and deeper wounds.
So subconsciously, I would be looking for those signals of having someone that could possibly abandon me in a relationship?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. So each time you have these traumatic events as a child, what does that do to the brain and the nervous system, and how might that make you react as triggers, I guess?
Can you ask the question?
Like say you have, that was kind of all over the place. So say you have a traumatic event as a child. The nervous system saves that somehow. From this book I'm reading, this trauma book, and they show this chart. Trauma, it goes back down. And so when the brain feels that again, it reacts. And the brain only has seconds to respond, and it may want to flee or whatever it wants to do to protect itself from that trauma.
Yeah. So trauma, I like to relate trauma to like breaking a bone. It happens in an instant, but it takes a long time to heal. Your brain actually rewires really quickly when you have trauma, a traumatic experience, because it's a survival thing. I mean, it's an evolutionary advantage in a lot of ways. Maybe not as much as it used to be, but when you experience a situation where your life is in danger or someone else's life is in danger, you learn really, really fast what to do in that same situation. So when that same situation shows up or something that reminds you of that and makes you feel that way again, then the reaction is almost automatic, unless you're aware of it and you can kind of slow it down, and work through it, get yourself regulated. Because again, the part of the brain that reacts to, I'm doing my hand brain thing. This is like my model of the brain and nervous system. But when your survival brain feels the same way as it did in that situation where there was actual danger, it will respond in a similar way to the time that you actually were in danger. So that's why you see a lot of like what people call overreactions, or they seem like, where is this coming from? Or there's no danger here. What's going on? Why is, or if it's them, like, why is my heart racing right now? There is no danger here. Yeah. Because your brain will respond to anything that even reminds you of that experience. But it also responds to, if there's, we were talking a little bit before the podcast started about emotional abandonment and how emotional pain lights up the same parts of the brain as physical pain, which is crazy because you're not actually feeling a physical pain sensation, but your brain is reacting to the emotional pain as if you're in actual danger. So the difference is, though, when you're in physical pain, your body produces endorphins, the natural painkiller. Mm-hmm. And, it makes sense because you can actually see something that has harmed you, so you can really process that quickly. When it comes to emotional pain, it's so much more complex than that. There's no endorphins, nothing to cut the pain. Your brain is reacting as if you're in danger, and there's nothing to cut that pain. And it doesn't always make any sense, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't quickly resolve what's going on in the moment. Yeah. So that's why a lot of people turn to things that will relieve that pressure for a little while, whether it's, substances or process addictions or some kind of short-term energy relieving behavior, because emotional pain does the same thing. Yeah. So if we were relating this back to abandonment is both grief and rejection. Rejection is emotional pain. So people who are feeling, that abandonment pain, may react as if there is a life-threatening situation. Yeah. How many people do you think go through life without even knowing they have those issues? Because it takes a lot to reflect and be self-aware. Like with myself, lately, past couple months, I just feel like all these emotions are just like a bottleneck of emotions, and nothing could come out. But when I got to the root of it about a month ago and I started working on that closure, it kind of opened up everything else for me, almost like a floodgate. Like I know what I need to work on now. And it's also helped me spiritually alongside of that path, which I can see, the further I get with this, that the spiritual will just keep growing right along with that. Yeah, so I was going to ask you how that's been for you, but you kind of already answered that question. You've kind of added something in. And a lot of people turn to spirituality because the antidote, I guess, to grief and rejection, pain, and all of that is connection. And if you're not able to connect to the people that you want to connect with, then finding something else, whether it's spirituality or the natural world or a pet or some kind of creative pursuit, if you can connect somehow to yourself or something else, then that can soothe that pain in a really healthy way. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I felt. It just, like I said, it didn't make sense for a while. I didn't know where my grief was. There's grief with my dad, which is still alive, my mother that had passed, there's grief with my divorce, there's like all these things, and I just didn't know where to start. Yep. And I was telling you earlier, everybody who walks into an office for counseling is experiencing some kind of grief. It's just a universal feeling, and we don't talk about it enough. Because nobody, a lot of times people are like, oh, don't ruin the vibe,
Yeah.
Can't talk about things that are hard. And that's why a lot of people avoid their own feelings because, well, what's wrong with me? Because I can't be happy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to answer your question, people can go through life not addressing that because it hurts.
Yeah.
And they're just like, nobody wants to, we're comfort-seeking creatures. Nobody wants to actually lean into that unless they see the value in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you had asked me a couple months ago, I'd say my childhood was great. Mm-hmm. And I have a great relationship with my dad. Like, I was just, I don't know, just always looking at the positive, the fun times that I had. Mm-hmm. And my therapist, which I still don't know, we could cheat and you could tell me, but I told her that I like to listen to some of the old TV shows back from when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I find so much comfort in some of those times when I was a kid. I was like, what makes me want to put myself back into that spot where maybe there was some turmoil and there were some things going wrong in my life? And she pointed to the trauma book she gave me. She's like, it's in the book. And I said, can you tell me? And she's like, nope, you're going to have to figure it out.
She's like, just do your work.
Yeah, she's making me work, which is really nice. Uh-huh. Like, she's challenging me and she's not, telling me what I want to hear. And I leave there. And I told her last time, I said, I understand you're here to guide me and I have to do the work. And I think that's the most important, in my opinion, with therapy is you better get started. Each time after my therapy lesson, I'll go home and journal and I'll write down everything that I learned in that therapy lesson so that the next therapy, I'll start with that. This is what I learned from last time so that I don't forget it.
Gosh, you're like the model client.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to do everything the right way. And what scares me the most is not getting better. That's what scares me the most, is not getting rid of all of that grief.
Yeah, and you won't get rid of all of it. That's an important thing. Because, like, if you feel grief, it means that you loved. It's kind of like a scar. When you get a scar from something that happened to you, it's proof that it happened, right? Your grief is just proof that you loved that person. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It hurts a little bit, but I've heard people who have been through really intense grief describe it as going from like that searing pain to kind of a gentle sadness. It's a lot more mellow.
Yeah.
It's not waves crashing over you anymore. It's like you see them coming and you can maybe ride it a little bit.
Yeah.
Because like when you're a kid, you don't have the understanding and capacity for abstract thought that we do as adults. Nothing makes sense when you're really little.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel like, you're very dependent on people. But I work with people in like the transitional age a lot when they're like leaving their house and going to college or starting a job and moving away from their family of origin. And they start to realize, that stuff that happened in my childhood, even though it seemed like it was normal at the time, probably wasn't that great. And the realization brings its own grief. You're like, what happened? You're grieving this childhood that you thought that you had. So maybe when you go back to those TV shows, you're trying to reconnect with that younger version of yourself who is just really blissful and unaware.
Oh, yeah. Oh, now I have to finish the book. Thanks.
Tell your therapist I'm sorry.
I'll still finish the workbook. Yeah, it's just so interesting how you have to almost go through the process. I've had this therapy book, which I showed you. I've had it for a year and a half. First time I got it, I circled a couple things and then never picked it up. But once I started reading it and doing the actual work, that's when I'm like, oh my gosh, like everything just starts to like come together.
Mm-hmm. And you start to realize that it's not in your head. It actually happened. It wasn't okay, but you don't have to hold on to anger about it. You can kind of let it resolve and forgive. And forgiveness, this is what I tell people a lot. A lot of people think that forgiveness would mean excusing what happened. And that's not what it is. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness is allowing yourself to release the anger, not excusing what happened, not denying how it impacted you, not even necessarily reconciling with the person. But it's basically just saying, I'm done being angry about this, because anger is heavy.
Yeah.
And it stands in the way of actually being able to do the work, because anger is a powerful feeling. That's what people kind of will default to because they don't want to feel vulnerable. But if you finally are able to move the anger out of the way, that's when you get to the real stuff that needs to be, it's the wounded part of you that needs to be healed.
Yeah. Yeah, vulnerability, when you said that, isn't that the key to a lot of things, is just being open to realize what happened and your faults and how you're going to fix them. And
Yep. You probably have read a lot of Brene Brown, right?
a lot of what?
Brene Brown.
Who's
and her
that?
work on, no? Really?
No.
Oh, wow. Brene Brown is a social worker from Texas.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She does a lot of work on shame and vulnerability and how important vulnerability is for connection. And it's basically the key to connection. If you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable, you're not going to be able to connect.
Oh, really? That makes sense, because you're seeing an outer shell of someone and not their true inner vulnerability.
Yeah. The other thing that she mentioned in one of her TED Talks was that we feel connected to people who are willing to be open and vulnerable. And we admire them for their courage, for doing that, the openness. And at the same time, we absolutely hate being that person because it's scary, right?
I actually like being vulnerable.
Cool.
It makes me feel better as a person.
You must have some safe people to kind of hold space for you.
Yeah, emotional safety we talked about last time.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah, people can be vulnerable if they know that they have a home base where they can go when things are hard. If they don't have that, because maybe their home base abandoned them, it's harder to be open and vulnerable. Because,
Yeah.
If you're open and vulnerable and you get clobbered, what are you going to do, right?
Yeah, so you can have very judgmental people in your life that when you open up and you are vulnerable, they can shut you down.
Oh, yeah.
And can that become a pattern in your head and your nervous system?
Absolutely, yes. I have people who come in here and they're like, well, I know I'm just probably being dramatic, but... And I'm like, I want you to throw that word out. You're not being dramatic. You're having real, authentic feelings, and that is okay.
Yeah.
And if people aren't allowed to have those feelings and they're never taught how to deal with those feelings in a productive, helpful way, they kind of get pushed down and buried. And I tell people, you can bury it, but it's kind of like toxic waste. It'll stay contained for a while. Eventually, it'll leak out and poison everything around it.
Yeah.
So if you leave it there. And another metaphor we use a lot in counseling sessions is when you stuff it down and the pressure builds, eventually that pressure is going to explode.
That's what I did.
I mean,
stuffed it all down. It didn't explode, but came out in tears, maybe. Is that an explosion?
Sure. I mean, I guess my son brought home homework about, they were talking about volcanoes. I didn't know there were different kinds of volcanoes. I mean, I kind of knew that, but I never really thought about it. One of them was cone shaped, and it was the one that would violently erupt and explode. Yeah. And the other one was kind of mound shaped, and it was the kind that would just the lava would flow. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, ooh, I guess the goal is to be more like the second one.
Yeah.
And not like the first one.
Yeah. You're trying to correlate that with your studies and with your clients. Over here we have this volcano. Which one are you? Which volcano?
Exactly. I love nature metaphors. Metaphors in general, because the survival part of the brain actually thinks in pictures. So if you can find a way to create a picture out of the message, then when people are in that vulnerable state, it actually can connect.
Do you think some people, you have to be desperate in order to fix some of your closure issues and things like that? You have to hit a desperation point?
I think that's one way to do it. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the best way to do it, but that's often how people end up reaching out for help. There's been so much stigma against reaching out for help and seeking mental health therapy, and people haven't recognized the value in it.
Yeah.
For a long time. It's so encouraging to see the younger generations oh yeah, my therapist said blah blah blah. They talk about it like it's not a big deal, because it's not.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who have been conditioned to believe that seeking therapy makes you weak, won't do it. And so it does have to be a rock bottom situation before, or not forced, but sometimes people who have addictions or have been in jail or whatever are mandated to go to counseling, which that's not always the best route, because people need to be motivated to do the work.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to get to that motivation. Because the thing about abandonment is often there are no good answers. There are no answers at all. Like if the person just disappears, the people are left like, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And a lot of times people will internalize that, especially if the abandonment happened when they were kids, or, people will internalize that and start blaming themselves because there's no one else to blame. There's no answer to the questions.
Why would an adult blame themselves for their parents not being in their lives? Like, what could some of the excuses be?
Well, when it's your parent, we often regress to younger versions of ourselves when we're around family. So, like, when it's your, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the worst behavior sometimes, like teenage behaviors with siblings, because that's when you lived with them last,
Yeah.
So if it's your parent, you may regress to the time that you first really noticed feeling that way, and kids can't understand, a lot of times, because developmentally kids don't even know that other people have thoughts until a certain age. They don't realize that other people are thinking things about them, and like they're the center of the world, right? Because that's just how kids' brains are till a certain age.
Mm-hmm.
So if the abandonment happened really young, then you may be kind of in that place, like stuck at that age, and that understanding of that experience from the viewpoint of that little kid. And it takes stepping out of it and seeing it from a third party perspective, to be able to say, no, it wasn't me, that was their stuff. Or now that I know more about my parent and their experiences and why they may behave the way they behave, I can recognize that it's not necessarily my fault. It's not my fault. You were a kid, right?
Yeah. But what could some of the reasons be? I was a bad kid. I didn't do good in sports. I got in trouble. I went to jail. Like, they can just make up things in their head that why their parents don't want to be in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that happens with grief too. Like, sometimes kids believe that the death of their loved one was their fault because they didn't say goodnight, or they said that they hated them. Yeah. It can be any like negative, like this is the last thing I remember about an interaction with this person that made them mad. And because they're mad, now they're gone.
Yeah.
Right.
That would be tough.
Mm-hmm.
I have, with my mom, she had dementia, and she had to go into a nursing home because she needed 24-hour care, and she'd be up all night, and she needed medication, and she was falling. She needed people with her, but she was in there for 2 years, and I still have guilt with that, and I know I have to get rid of that somehow. But I'm going to write her a letter and, put it all out there and see if that will help. And like I said, that's, my next thing that I'm going to deal with, but... I guess I'm also thinking about what she would tell me if she was actually here and I was saying those things to her. She would say, stop. Yeah. I don't want to hear that. You did the best you could. You were a loving son. And so I want to try to, absorb those things as well. Yeah. Because I know she'd say that.
Good.
Go live your best life. Please. That's what she would want. What's a saying that I just saw? It said, don't grieve your loved one, but show gratitude. And that kind of...
I don't know how I feel about that, because grieving is important.
Did I say it wrong?
I don't know, but that sounds like spiritual bypass to me.
I thought I had like this aha moment, and you're like, nope, that's not a good one. Jeez,
leave it to the therapist to ruin your...
I thought that was the best short clip ever, and then you just ruined it.
Sorry, man. That's not how it works, though.
Well, maybe it was...
There's...
I didn't bring the book. What? Instead of grieving your loved one's loss, show gratitude? I don't know. It was
gratitude's important.
It was in a healing book of loss. So
okay. Maybe
that was just not a good saying.
No, I'm just thinking, so a lot of time there's something called spiritual bypass where people are like, high vibes only, don't want to feel bad stuff, just show gratitude, don't grieve. And I'm like, that's not real. You're just skipping the messy middle, and you can't do that. It's really important to go through that hard stuff because if you don't, then it's kind of like that toxic waste that gets buried. If you just... Yeah. But you can, when you have been able to grieve and feel the feelings and go through the hard stuff and, just fall apart, when you're rebuilding, finding the gratitude for the relationship and the experiences and all the good stuff is definitely part of the healing process. But you can't skip all the hard stuff.
Yeah. Was it you that was telling me in another country when someone passes away, they have like a month-long funeral? Or was that someone else telling me that?
That wasn't me, but
Yeah, but they don't leave the house. Everyone brings food. They cry. They whatever they have to do, and they get it all out in 1 month, and it works for them. And I feel like that would be great instead of spreading it out over 5 years.
Yeah.
I'll just grieve once a month for the next 5 years.
Well, have you seen that new show on Apple TV called Shrinking with Jason Segel?
No.
And Harrison Ford? Oh, it's so good. So good. I highly recommend it. But
It's a movie or a series?
no, it's a series. There's only one. It's actually in the middle of the first series or first season. But it's a bunch of therapists at a CBT center, and one of them, his wife died, and he has a teenage daughter, and then one of the guys that he consults with, I can't remember what his loss was, but the Harrison Ford's character talks to the teenage girl every now and then, and he's like, I set a timer on my phone and grieve and put a song that's going to make me cry on my phone, and I just grieve really hard for 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And I let myself cry it out, and then when the timer goes off, I get up and I walk away from it, and I do that regularly. And that's what I tell clients to do all the time. If you can lean into grief intentionally on your terms when you have time to do it, it doesn't feel as intense because you kind of feel like you have some control over it.
Yeah.
But you are allowing yourself the space to do that, and you deserve to have that time to acknowledge that this person was important to you, and you're missing them, and allow yourself to feel what you need to feel, but not get stuck there.
Yeah.
Like when it clobbers you and hits you like a ton of bricks and you have to take a mental health day and you're just in bed all day, like that's, how helpful is that?
Yeah.
But we avoid grief as a society. We don't want to feel it because it's uncomfortable.
Isn't also letting go in your head when you let go of someone that passed? It's hard to do that. So if you grieve, that's almost saying they're gone.
Yes, and I hear that a lot. Like, if I stop being sad, then that means I don't love my person anymore. And I'm like, I hear you. And
You were going to say, I don't like hearing that. I don't like hearing that. Don't say that.
no, I think that it's not, you're not letting go of the person, you're letting go of the pain.
Oh, yeah.
But the pain
That's a
to
good
them
one.
feels like proof that they care about the person. But if they let go of the pain and start moving forward with their life, they feel like, well, that's just proof that I didn't love this person. No, that person was there. They've left a mark on you. You can acknowledge that. That's where the gratitude comes in, and anything that they gave you or taught you or whatever, you can continue to practice. But you don't have to feel so much pain anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and anger, back to anger. Some people think that when they're angry at someone, they're hurting that person. Like subconsciously, they know you're mad at them, but they really don't. They're going on with their lives. They're not thinking about you.
Yeah.
The only one you're hurting when you hold on to that anger is yourself.
Yeah, I tell clients that all the time. I'm like, holding on to anger and not being willing to consider forgiveness as an option is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah.
It's not doing anything.
That's a good way to put that. Drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will get angry sometimes, but it doesn't last long, and then but I hate holding on to anger.
Yeah.
I don't like that at all.
Anger's normal. We all have it. It's a normal emotion. We don't have to say that it doesn't belong, because it does. It's protective. It's motivating. I tell people it's like fire energy. You can burn down the house, or you can use it to cook your food.
Yeah.
It's motivating. It's useful. It belongs, just like all the other emotions. It just matters what you do with it.
Yeah.
So how did I describe it to someone the other day? Have you ever been to like a middle school band concert?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know that, the brass instruments sound really splatty.
Yes.
The sound is all over the place. As they get better at playing the instrument, they focus the sound in. And so I like to relate anger to that. When you have a lot of anger and just no productive use for it, it's kind of like that splatty sound for the brass instruments. But if you know how to manage your anger and you can use it to your benefit, it's kind of like focusing that sound.
Yeah. Were you in a band concert thinking about that?
No,
A middle school band concert?
I joined a choir recently, and I was like, oh, this is great, because I haven't been doing music for
really?
a long time, and it was such a huge part of my life.
That's another thing I wish I could do more of, is just something so different. Like I want to take like hip hop classes or something.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, do that.
I think I'd be
Anything
good
that
at
you
it.
can do that's like with other people and you're doing the same thing, especially if there's music or some kind of rhythm, that is super healing to your brain. It's regulating to the brainstem. It makes you feel like you're in sync and you're not alone with other people, so
Yeah.
you feel really connected. As for like-minded people, if you kind of become a lot like the people that you spend a lot of time with. So have you ever noticed that someone you've spent a lot of time with, you start adopting their mannerisms, and you're like, where did that come from?
Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. I know you've heard that as a therapist, but
I haven't heard it said that way, but yeah.
oh, okay. Was that a good one?
Sure, yeah.
Better than the grief thing? Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Yeah, I've heard that like several times, but it makes sense.
Yeah, if you're like the smartest person in the room or the most healed person in the room or the whatever, then you're in the wrong room. You got to find people who can help you grow.
Oh. If you're the most healed person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I may be the most healed person in the room, then where do I go?
You find another group of people.
How do I know that they're more healed than I am?
Well, that's a good question. That takes like real authentic
to ask
connection.
them.
You can kind of tell, like,
You fill out this questionnaire before we start hanging out.
yeah, right. Well, some people used to do that. You remember those questionnaires that people would have flying around Facebook?
Oh, yeah.
Can we be friends?
Yeah.
Am I compatible with this person?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, just talking to people. If people are able to like open up and be real with you, then chances are they're comfortable with who they are, and it's not going to be a I have to pretend kind of situation.
Yeah.
Trying to think of an example of people who have been through a lot and have learned a lot of skills, and can actually apply those skills to new situations. Because again, abandonment is not necessarily the person's problem. You know, they're not the reason necessarily. Like, there might be contributing factors, but if the person the person who left doesn't explain, well, this is what happened, this is why I'm leaving, then the person who has been left is kind of left to wonder. And maybe they can allow the problem to be the other person's problem because it's happened enough, or because they have healed past trauma or past abandonment problems, wounds, whatever. So I don't know. I get frustrated when people come in and they're like, they keep saying that I have this problem and I don't know what they're talking about. And then we go through it, and they tell me how they've worked through the problems or resolved the problems or who they talk to or what activities they do. And it seems like they are doing the work. A lot of times people just want there to be a problem, you know, for the other person to have a problem, because maybe if I say that person has a problem, then I don't have to take responsibility for what I did to them.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, let's say a person has abandonment issues from a child, and as an adult, they push people out of their lives constantly. How are they supposed to identify that is a problem that's related to past abandonment? You can go on forever and do that unless you identify it.
Sure. Well, I think there might be a completely different discussion on attachment styles. Attachment, I don't even like that term. Attachment behavior, because attachment is learned in the first year and a half of life. And there's no autobiographical memory of that time. You can't go back and say, oh, well, this is what happened to me, you know, blah, 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 and know, like, from that first party perspective, what happened. You might know a little bit about, like, maybe, you're in the foster care system, and you were neglected for a while. Like, I have a couple of nephews who that was what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But attachment can be learned. That's the thing. If you have attachment patterns that are not conducive to connection, it doesn't mean that you can't learn it. That's just the sensitive period for it, the first year and a half. But once you start to recognize, okay, well, this might have to do with the fact that my tendency in this kind of a situation is to run, or to be really anxious about the attachment, or to react, be really reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can say, okay, well, I know that that's because I have a compulsion to do that, but that's because my brain and nervous system are attuned to that. That was a survival behavior that worked for me in the past, and now it's not serving me. Mm-hmm. So if you're able to kind of look at your own behavior, see it from that third-party perspective, and then do something different, even though it feels counterintuitive.
Yeah.
When you start doing those different things, you start noticing different results.
Yeah.
And it's reinforcing in a way.
Yeah, this workbook I'm going through says that your brain, within seconds to survive, tells you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it can tell you got to get out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it knocks the thinking brain offline, because when you think too hard, when you're in a dangerous survival situation, you might die.
Yeah.
So thinking, decision making.
I keep reading that. Is it literally death? Like, for that survival?
Yeah, your brain is always worried about being
really?
Death.
Well, I know it's always worried about that, but
yeah.
Can an argument with someone and you flee that situation, could your brain have been telling you could die in the situation?
Yeah, that's that emotional, what's the word? It's that emotional pain. Because emotional pain is I keep referencing my hand brain, but it's in the survival part of the brain. If you feel like your connections are being broken, think about it when we were like living in tribal situations or out, in caves. If we didn't have people around us, we very likely would die, because we needed to be in community. We needed each other to survive. Mm-hmm. If you were out on your own, it was very, very likely that you would die. So if your connections are breaking and you're in danger of getting tossed out, yeah, that is a survival thing. And our brains we're wired to find the things in our environment that are going to harm us. That's our default setting, because that's how we evolved. That's how we survived for so long. But now we have to consciously evolve out of that. So the way to do that, one of the ways, is that gratitude thing. When you start saying, oh, everything sucks, I'm so sad, nobody loves me. Yeah, that's where you're going to go at first. But then when you start saying, oh, okay, this isn't helping me, what else is there?
Yeah.
And you start looking for, okay, well, I have a home. I have enough to eat. I have got a few close friends or family members or whatever. Here are my resources. Here are the things that, some people call them blessings, whatever. If you're able to find those in your environment, then over time, if you practice it regularly, then it kind of starts to happen on its own. It kind of replaces the original default. I like to call it, I like to tell clients, it's like pushing a car. Have you ever pushed a car that's in neutral?
Yeah.
You know how at first, you can't get it to go, your feet are slipping out from underneath
you.
But eventually, once you get some inertia, it's going, you're not pushing too hard.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going on its own and you're just running behind it.
Yeah.
That's what it's like when you're changing your brain. That's what gratitude can do. You can actually get to a place where it becomes your default.
That's what I know you said 6 to 8 months to reprogram your brain, but I already feel some of that relief.
Great.
In just a month.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? I also want to just take this very slowly and calculated and execute everything the right way. I don't want to try to rush it. Mm-hmm. Can you see a big difference in just a month?
Sure. What I was saying before is you get a whole new neural network in every 6 to 8 months. So a lot of people think that your brain just is the way that it is, but it's actually, have you ever seen Harry Potter, the movie, or read the books?
Yeah.
The moving staircases?
Yeah.
That's how your brain works. it's constantly rewiring all the time. Right now, as we're talking and as we're
Really?
learning about each other and we're, gaining insight from each other, our brains are changing.
Yeah.
So after 6 to 8 months, it's mostly kind of regenerated, I guess. A lot of the connections will stay the same if you're doing the same stuff. But if you're trying to do a lot of different things and you're really conscious about it, you can kind of speed that process up. It's not going
Yeah.
to change everything, but you are going to see a lot of noticeable results if you're doing consistent work.
My therapist, when we started talking about fast tracking, she said, "You want to fast track?" She's like, "Find your spiritual side alongside of that." But I had already started that before she said it. So when she said that, I was like, a light bulb just went off.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also just been a sponge with everything around me and people at the gym and reading and journaling, and I'm not like watching TV and, even this podcast, I'm like just absorbing as much as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to learn to my maximum capacity.
Great.
That's
And
how
actually,
bad I
there's-
want to fix. I know you don't like that word fix, and I get that now. You're not fixing anyone. Therapists are not fixing anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I want to heal as quickly and as properly as I can so it doesn't come back.
Well, it might, though. Yeah. There's always going to be a little bit of grief there. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just how it works. And I told
If it
someone...
comes in spurts, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. And you feel like you can anticipate it or see it coming
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But yes, a lot of the work that's done when there aren't any good answers, when it comes to like grief, like what happens after we die, nobody knows. Nobody knows for sure. Or maybe some people do if they've actually like had near-death experiences or something like that. But yeah, no, like those big existential questions or abandonment, the why, I hear that a lot. I don't know. Is there a way to know? Especially if you don't have the answer from the person. Like there is no answer to that. So when you hit that wall,
Yeah.
that's when the existential part of, healing kind of comes in. So, because we're not just, I heard someone, what did she say? Meat suits. I heard that on a podcast this morning and I was like, oh, she didn't like it either. But we're not just like, it's not just this life, probably.
Yeah.
When I worked at hospice with teenagers, music was a big one. Because that's just, think about when you were a teenager. You can remember where you were when you heard certain songs when you were a kid. That is deep. And music hits that brainstem, that rhythm that we need to feel okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of creative language in there that creates pictures in our head. And the survival part of our brain thinks in pictures. And pictures are the connection between the survival brain and the thinking brain. I mean, they're not separate brains.
Oh, really? The survival brain thinks in pictures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the brainstem, the really primitive part of our brain thinks in sensations and emotions. Survival brain is emotions and pictures, and thinking brain is pictures and words. That's why when you're feeling really deep pain, that's down here, and the thinking brain might be off. So if you try to talk your way through it, words cannot access certain places. There is like no way to describe certain things that you're experiencing through words, but you can describe them through pictures and artwork and music.
Yeah. That's my problem is I think I can just think my way through my issues sometimes without actually putting in the work.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally realized, you gotta put in the work. Turn everything off, get the book out, get the highlighter, go through the exercises and cry if you need to, take a break, get back on it. But I'm very anxious to get back to it. Mm-hmm. That's how, do you ever see that? Like, I just can't wait to get back home and journal and like all of those things that go along with the healing process.
Yeah, obviously it's working and you're seeing the benefits of it and it feels good to you.
Yeah.
It's reinforcing.
Yes. Yeah, and like I said, what scares me the most is not continuing this like this journey of just feeling better all the time. It scares me to fall back to what I was doing.
We can't
Because
be
it wasn't
afraid
working.
can't be afraid of the hard stuff. That's the thing. When you're afraid of feeling bad, then you're going to avoid it.
No, I'm afraid of gaining 2 or 3 months momentum of improving myself and then falling back and losing it all. Like,
That's the change process. That's exactly what it is. You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
you mean I could fall back?
Yes, you probably will.
Well, what kind of motivation is this? All right, well,
just
thanks
being
for being on the podcast. It's
I'm just
time to
being
go.
honest. That's how it works. When
Jeez.
people are changing, it's not always like always forward progress. When you're changing, there are going to be backward steps. That's normal.
Well, could you at least say like 50% fall back? You went all the way back to when I started.
I did?
Yeah. I said, could I fall all the way back to where I was? And you said yes. Well, because it's true.
Yeah, and it could happen. So here's the thing. When you are extinguishing something, like a behavior, okay, so maybe your behavior is, I don't know, whatever it is that you're changing, right? If you're extinguishing that, it takes a little time to do that, but once it finally starts to drop off and you're feeling good and you're coasting along and everything's great and all of a sudden you have a setback, it might spike to the original place that it was before you got to a place of healing. But the thing, it's called an extinction burst. It's a real thing. But they usually are very temporary. You can see it for what it is. You can say, oh, yep, that sucked. And I know better and I know what to do now.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm aware of. That's where I feel like I'm heading towards. Is if I start to do that, I'm going to realize that. And I'm going to take a step back and go through all the exercises that I've been doing and all of my journaling, and I'll be able to figure it out.
You know what gets in the way of that? Shame. Oh my gosh, how am I back here again? This is terrible. I didn't make any progress. I thought I made all this progress and it turns out I'm back to where I started. And people start getting in their heads about that, like, why do I even bother? But the reality is like, yep, I did that because that's my default behavior. And that's where I go when I'm stressed, because thinking brain is offline and survival brain is in the driver's seat. But I can give myself a little bit of grace, forgive myself, fix what I need to fix, and then pick back up where I was right before this happened. It's temporary.
Well, your survival brain can really cause problems for you.
Yeah.
It can make you like not survive.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. When you live in an environment where it was necessary to develop that behavior because it did keep you safe, it is really deep in there. But then when you are out of that environment, somewhere else where it's safer, that behavior is still going to show up, but it's going to have a very different impact. It's actually going to probably be a problem and harm you. So when you can recognize, okay, well, that served me back then, but now it's not. And you can say, okay, well, what do I need now?
Yeah. I always thought it takes a lot of trauma in order to develop a pattern, but you're saying it could just be once.
Yep. Yeah, because your brain rewires to keep you safe. And trauma is something that changes your brain right off the bat, like really fast. Because if you were in a situation where your life was in danger, you're going to want to remember what that looks like and how to get out of there. So you may develop hypervigilance. There's also a thing called sensory flooding. When people go through a lot of trauma, it kind of confuses the filter, the sensory filter, opens it up and allows a lot more in, which can be really overwhelming. That's why a lot of people, like Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink, mentioned how some people get something he called temporary autism, where it's like just so much overwhelming sensory information coming in all at once because of the trauma, because you don't know what's safe. You have to look around and make sure, it's a hypervigilance thing. But with healing, you kind of fix the filter. So it isn't as overwhelming. But until that part is healed, you may be like just very aware of everything around you, really overwhelmed and exhausted at the end of the day. And your behavior may be really reactive because fight or flight is a reaction, right? So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. When you're overwhelmed, thinking brain goes offline and you just act.
Yeah.
for survival.
It is also overwhelming, especially for someone, I have some insight because I've been going through it, but for someone that doesn't know anything about it or know that it even exists or that there are patterns of trauma. And I just feel like there's just so many people that go through life just doing the same thing over and over again, the destructive behavior.
Yeah, that's traumatic, what do they call it, reenactment or re-experiencing? I can't remember which term it is. But it's an unconscious behavior trying to resolve the problem, putting yourself in the same situation so that you can change the story. But often it adds layers to the trauma, right?
Yeah. That's why I was asking earlier. I was just wondering, people think that they're okay, but they're not. But I guess there's no way to recognize that unless you do it yourself. Like you said, you can't tell someone, hey, you have some problems.
Someone I used to work with who was a superior of mine, she said the patient report is the gold standard. And I love that.
Oh, the patient report is the gold standard.
Yeah. Because if somebody says, I'm in pain, and you can't find the source of the pain, and you conclude, well, this person isn't actually in pain, they just want attention. The person actually is in pain. They're experiencing whatever it is as pain. Or there's some underlying thing that hasn't been discovered yet or whatever through the test. You're kind of invalidating what their experience is. So if they're saying, I'm okay, I lean into that. Okay.
Okay, see you next week. It'll be $150.
No, like, okay, well,
like, no,
what is
175.
bothering you? And usually, and that's what the person-centered care that I do. If I see something that is gives me pause, I'll say, hey, have you ever thought of this? And if they're like, no, that's not an issue, I'm like, all right. And then maybe, as we're talking, we come back to the same thing. We find out that maybe that is something that needs addressed. But I'm not going to say, well, you're wrong.
Yeah, you
I'm
can't.
not them.
Yeah, you can't drill them. What's your problem? It's the last time I'm going to ask you. Yeah, I've realized that. My therapist is really good at, like the other day I went in there and I'm like, I'm nervous. As soon as I went in, I was like, I'm normally not nervous. And she's like, why are you nervous? And I was like, I
she said,
knew you were
why?
going to ask me that. So I was nervous because I was afraid of failure through this therapy. That was my biggest fear. But so far, I'm doing everything right. And what you just talked about, I identified the root of my issue, my beginning issue. And I think that without that, I don't know that you can skip. Like when I think about mine, with my father, I feel like that is the root. Because it's going to help me make sense of even my marriage. And it's just going to help me with closure with a lot of things, I believe. But that was kind of like the beginning, the floodgates opened, and now I just have to deal with everything.
Mm. You mentioned spirituality, and I think a lot of healing this stuff is feeling like you have some kind of a connection to something bigger than yourself. Whether that is a religion, whether that is volunteering, whether that's just hanging out in the woods with your dog, whatever. You find a path to feeling connected. And if you can do that, then it takes away a lot of the fear. Because abandonment wounds and trauma and grief and all of that stuff, it's like breaking of the connection. If there's somewhere else to go where you can feel that connection, then it feels safe. And safety is what this part of your brain needs to be able to calm down enough so that you can think through the problem.
Yeah. I could see that. And I do feel myself becoming more patient and more calm through this whole process. Like I feel like I can think more clear and
probably giving yourself a little bit more grace than maybe before.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know I've been there when I started to allow myself, stop putting myself down for the behaviors that developed because of trauma. I started healing. And I like to tell people, imagine reparenting yourself. Imagine that's a younger part of yourself that's just really hurting. And the more you ignore that part of yourself, the more it hurts,
Yeah.
When somebody's sitting there in pain asking for help, are you just going to say, you're just asking for attention. You're being so dramatic, blah, blah, blah. Would you say that to your own child? Probably not. Well, hopefully not. But
Yeah.
but so like when you are in that place and you're acting out, you're reacting to whatever it is that hurt you. Be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
I tell people that all the time. Just, hey, be gentle with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And bring that part of you back in to the fold, you know? I know that sounds like a lot of people are gonna be like, there's multiple personalities. It's not. It's just like parts work. Like there is a part of you that is stuck in that time, in that experience, that you need to bring back in and show that they belong and they're loved and their experience is valuable and their insights and wisdom that they gain from that experience are also valuable.
Yeah.
So just forgiving yourself. Man, some of the most important work that people do in sessions with a counselor is just forgiving themselves. Because yeah, because trauma, abandonment, grief, all that stuff, a lot of that comes with an undertone of like, it's my fault, you know? And the reactions that we have to that pain is also part of the experience. And if we look back and we say, man, I did something really terrible. Why? Why did you do that terrible thing? You know, what happened right before? What's the antecedent to that behavior? Mm-hmm. Maybe it was a reaction to... There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. Have you heard of it? Bessel van der Kolk. It's a really great book about trauma and like what it does to the body. But he mentioned how there was a soldier that he talked to who came back from war, where I think his whole platoon got napalmed and he was like the only survivor, which obviously is a trauma. But then he went into a village and killed a bunch of people, including kids. And then he came home and never thought of it again until he had his own kid. And when his kid started crying, that was the trigger.
Oh, really?
And all of that came back out. And he could not reconcile or forgive himself for that. But he was in like pure survival mode, just reaction, kill or be killed kind of thing. And he couldn't forgive himself for the things that he did as a reaction to the trauma of losing all of his friends.
Yeah.
So it's not just about what happens to you, it's about what you did in response to what happened to you that sometimes people get stuck at.
Yeah. So much to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that cleared it up for everyone listening.
Everybody's healed.
Does everyone feel better? But I do know this also, as you were talking there and talking about gratitude and forgiving yourself. I was lonely, a couple months ago or whatever. But now I don't feel lonely. Like as I'm going through this process, I don't know if it's because I'm so absorbed with this or I'm letting things go or whatever it might be, but I just feel like this whole thing is going on. Do you ever hear that from people that are like maybe lonely and kind of down and then they start the process and they're not lonely anymore? No,
maybe.
Never.
Yeah, I mean,
never heard that before. You're still lonely.
I don't know.
You're
trying to
hallucinating.
think of, like, what that would... You're hallucinating your friends. What's up? No, I'm trying to think of why that would happen. Probably because you're just feeling more connected to something.
Could it be the spiritual side that
Probably.
is riding alongside me now?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, reciting Bible verses and carrying a Bible because I don't even know about all that, even though I grew up Catholic. But I'm starting, and I feel like it's going to, continue on. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that's how anything that is worthwhile, it's just going to just baby steps, just very slowly. And if it happens too quick, it's probably not going to last or it's not real.
Yeah, that's that spiritual bypass I was talking about. If you skip the messy parts, the parts that hurt, if you don't want to grieve, you just want to feel better, then yeah, it's not probably going to last. It's kind of like eating a lot of sugar and getting a sugar high. I've got so much energy, and then all of a sudden crash.
Yeah.
You got to have the meat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Find guides. Like find people who can hold space for you skillfully. That's really hard to do. Because people will feel their own feelings, sometimes make it about them, and that take away from what you need.
Yeah.
Or they'll feel it too intensely and try to like pull you out of it, before you're ready to be out of it. because they're trying to relieve their own stress. But if there's somebody maybe who has been through it, the same thing that you've been through, and you know that they have done the work and they have healed as much as they can be important guides through the process. So yeah, find good people who can do that for you.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I was talking to him yesterday. I mean, what better guide than someone that's been through it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. They know the way.
Yeah.
Or a way.
Yeah. All right, well.
Cool.
Thanks for...
How are you? Are you okay?
Being on the podcast. I know, I'm like sitting over here like, let me see what other questions I have.
Hey, another thing is don't go too fast. Because if you're trying, it's kind of like binge eating, you know? Too much too fast is not going to...
I was wondering that, but I think I have a pretty good balance of that.
Good.
I think so.
Yeah.
Another thing that scares me.
Leave yourself time to digest it and integrate it and incorporate it, whatever terminology you like to use.
Yeah. It's like I'm pretty much past my first closure. I'm pretty much past that. Maybe a couple more weeks, I'm good, and then I'll grieve my mother's loss, and then on from there. So I do feel like I want to absorb every step. I want to think about it, let it sink in, and then go on to the next one. Because I already know having all these things in my head and just trying to figure them out, think them out, is just not working.
Right.
So I have to feel them out.
And that takes time. In fact, that's maybe years. I know. I've been working on my own stuff for 20 years or something? Because I had stuff happen when I was in college. Yeah. And again,
I'm not going years.
You've caught yourself though. That if you can catch yourself, then you can stop doing the things that add layers to the trauma. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So as soon as somebody has something really hard happen to them, if they can get support right away. In fact, they're putting social workers in doctors' offices and emergency rooms and everything to kind of help people process stuff that's happened so that they don't encode it in a way that's going to harm them into long-term memory. So the sooner the better. And that was I didn't do it fast enough. I went years before I started working on my own stuff. So, and
as a therapist, you went years?
No, this was back when I was, yeah.
Oh, okay.
What do you mean?
You're like, that was offensive. What do you mean by that? No, what I was saying was you were a therapist, but yet you just worked on yourself little by little. But this was before you became a therapist.
Yeah, but I mean, I was majoring in psychology, so I was kind of sort of vaguely aware of things, but
okay.
Didn't have the resources, didn't have the support necessarily. Maybe a lot of pride and ego was keeping me out, and I had enough support that I was doing okay, but it wasn't until things started to fall apart that I was like, oof, I gotta do something about that. So
is that what made you want to help other people? What you went through in life?
Yes, I think partly, yeah. Because when I was in therapy, I was like, this is really helping.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I want to do this, because it feels important and I feel like I'd be good at it,
Yeah.
But I kind of fell into it, sort of.
You're like, I have a voice for it. I've got to do this.
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
So, but yeah, you're right. Do it a little bit at a time. It's always going to be a process. You're always going to feel a little bit of pain now and then. It's like a scar, every now and then. I broke my ankle a few years ago, and every now and then when the weather changes in the right way, I can still feel the pain. And it's been healed for years, and I may always have that. And I was in a car accident, and, my neck got messed up, and it still bothers me. So there are going to be things that happen in your life that, you're going to do the work as much as you can, and you're going to continue to address it when it comes up, but you're still going to have a little pain now and then.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand you can't climb right to the mountain. I just don't want to come all the way back down to the bottom.
And you may, but you'll get right back up.
There you go again.
It's true, though.
But won't it take longer to climb back up?
No.
Because you're tired?
No, you know the way.
Oh, you're stronger. Yeah.
You're stronger, yep.
Yeah, you know the way. You're stronger. You know the path.
Mm-hmm.
You know which rocks to stay off of because those might take you longer.
Mm-hmm. And you're not afraid. Fear is the thing that holds people back most of the time.
Yes. Okay. You ended that with something positive. Not all the way back down to the bottom of the mountain.
I want to heal and be done forever. Okay.
Yeah. What are the signs of abandonment issues?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's different for everybody, but you can sometimes see overachieving a lot. Like, if I work hard enough, I will earn this person's love.
Mm-hmm.
You might see perfectionism, or just complete rebellion and giving up on people, just complete isolation and I hate everybody kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, struggling to connect with other people. Because interpersonal trauma is so hard to heal. Because we heal so much more quickly in most situations within relationship. But if relationships are the thing that hurt you, you're going to want to avoid the thing that hurt you, right? So it takes a lot longer, it's a lot harder, and it's definitely not ideal. So
Last podcast, what you said, little clip went well. A lot of views. You said that it all comes down to relationships with people. Is the start of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's neuroscience behind that too. I mean, it doesn't all start. It's not like you can't heal unless you have relationships, because it's just a lot slower. And the survival brain, one of the things that the function of that part of your brain is attachments and connections. So if you have that, then you feel safer. And when you feel safer, healing happens a lot faster.
Yeah. So if I was a client of yours and the words had been kind of coming out of my mouth for the past 45 minutes to an hour, would you say, yeah, it looks like he's made some improvements? Or would you say, it looks like he has a lot of work to do?
If you were the client?
Yeah.
No, I think that you're very motivated. I feel like you're doing the right things and putting the right things in your path so that you have opportunities available to you for healing.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I'm looking for every tool also.
Yeah. And like I said, you're really motivated. You're kind of like on fire with this stuff, which is great. Recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
the
you
only
always
thing
got
I
to
would
throw
caution you to
something
say.
in there, don't you? Oh, my gosh.
Realistic. It's important. Do you want me to just lie to you? You are awesome. Everything's great.
know.
Perfect. Yeah.
But it's always that probably keeps people working. Like, don't think you've solved some kind of puzzle here, because you haven't. Just keep going.
No, I mean, I get really excited and applaud and cheer for people when they've made progress. And I'm like, hey, did you notice that you're doing this now? Or, oh my gosh, that's amazing that this is something that you wouldn't have done before, and now you're doing it without even thinking. And, I bring all that up, and they're like, wow, I didn't even know that I was doing that. I'm like, I see you for 1 hour once a week or once every other week. You see you every day, all the time. So I get to be the one who says, hey, did you notice that this is happening now? But when there have been times where people are like, okay, I've done all the work, everything's good, bye-bye. And I'm like, I don't know if I would advise you to not continue. If it's not with me, that's okay. But
yeah.
Because growth that's too fast is not really stable.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either.
So
that's why I like to go slow. The tallest building in the world, how long did it take to build that foundation?
Right, I don't
Look
know.
at me trying to come up with like a little...
Yeah, metaphors there. Like it. Yeah.
No, you don't.
I do. I love
I like
metaphors. I use them all
Are
the
you
time.
ever going to use that with a client?
Probably.
Thank you for being on the podcast again. You have to be better than Dr. Phil, though, so we have to come up with some kind of cool name. Do you want to be on again?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
they are very interesting topics, and people like you, and so...
Cool.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you.